It's okay. I guess there's always like something new to learn, and it's always really interesting to have conversations with people about this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited as well.
Especially people that are willing. That's the thing. That's the reason I
Yeah.
started this, because there's not a lot of people that are actually willing to have their like positions challenged or actually have a meaningful discussion, which is sad. But
Yeah.
when Abraham, I was about to when Abraham, there's my head again, just like
At home is Butters for people who are really close, like friends or family.
yeah.
What'd you say?
They call me Butters.
Seriously?
It's a funny story, and he didn't even know where it came from. But according to his brother, when they were little, so babies, like when you're like between the ages of like 1 and 4, you when you're learning to speak, you'll like mispronounce stuff. And I think he tried
Yeah.
to say brother or something like that. I think that's what his brother said, and he said Butters. And that's the story I know from his brother. That's why he described it to me. All right,
That's so
so
We were
cute.
like
Yeah.
middle school.
yeah. All right, so now we're running and ready to go. All right, everyone. So we are on episode 4 of Latino Thoughts. These episodes have been, in my opinion, awesome. We've had really good discussions. Abraham and I have gotten like really good topics going. We've had some really interesting guests. Yesterday we had our first Spanish episode, which I thought was really good. And today we have a special guest. We have Valeria Torres-Olivares, who is a student from Princeton University. So yeah, we got some high caliber speakers today. And so Valeria, Abraham and I introduce ourselves pretty much every time we do this. So is there anything you want people to know about yourself, or anything you might you would like people to know before we start?
Yeah, sure. So you guys already know my name, Valeria. I'm a rising junior at Princeton studying public policy, international relations, just like Abraham, but with a minor in computer science and entrepreneurship.
Computer
Abraham's also doing
science.
entrepreneurship.
That's my
Yes.
minor. That's my minor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's what I'm studying. I currently occupy my time between a million things, one being a nonprofit I started when I was in high school with my younger sister. It's essentially, we've been doing it for 3 years now, and we've been able to reach over 500 students, which has been really amazing. The nonprofit's called Code Equal, and we started it because we saw a lack of a bunch of things, but predominantly because we usually were the only Latina women, and I was always the only Latina inside of my computer science classrooms, and I wanted to change that, at least within my own community. So we started this nonprofit to teach classes for free, since we saw, I'm going to keep it short, but basically we saw that there was an issue with a lack of a pipeline going into STEM for minority students, such as Black and Latino students, predominantly women in both of those, but in general, all of we're all underrepresented in STEM. But we wanted to just teach free classes. So we've been teaching free classes at our public library every week for the past 3 years. We have different levels for introductory, like beginner students, intermediate students, since we've had students coming back with us every year. And we've also been doing workshops. We now do tutorials online since going virtual, as well as hackathons. So
Oh,
that was
yes.
kind of our way of.
I love hackathons. So I went
Exactly.
So now this is just the nerd in me before we start. What languages do you know, and what languages do you start to teach? Like when you teach the nonprofit, like when you teach at your nonprofit, what is usually like the first language that you teach the people that go?
Yeah, so we typically start with Python. That was the first language that I learned in high school. So that was the one that I wanted to start with, especially since it's probably the most user-friendly in terms of readability.
Yeah, and it's the most straightforward. It's just line by line.
Yeah, exactly. So we teach Python predominantly, but we also do web development, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all of that. We also teach workshops in Swift, so iOS development. Occasionally, what else? That's predominantly what we teach. We also have tutorials in Java, but I personally know Python, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Swift. What else? And I'm learning C# and C right now for my internship that's coming up. So
That is awesome. So out of the ones that you mentioned, I know Python, I know C++, and I know some C#. But because it was a minor, the last language that I went to Texas A&M State College, not Princeton, but But I think I learned a pretty good deal. And then the last
Yeah.
two that I learned were it was Haskell and no, was it? What was it? I graduated a few years back, and I finished my minor like 3 years in. I was originally a math major. Well, I am a math
Oh, wow.
major. I am a math major. Hold on. Oh my God, what was that last language? Was it LabVIEW? No, it wasn't LabVIEw. I'll remember it. I learned like 6 different ones. So yeah, that's just the nerd in me before we start, because computer science, that's awesome. I love
understand.
coding. I love coding. All right, so
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun.
yeah, so
that
let's.
I know R.
Oh, I know R2.
That's funny. All right, so again, Abraham has been looking forward to this one. So the first topic that we're going to tackle now is, of course, toxic masculinity. And the reason that I'm glad that we're doing this is because I have not exposed myself to a lot of these terms, right? So I turned to be a little bit more on the conservative side, right? So I haven't really seen like the point of views that Abraham shares. And again, I haven't really exposed myself to toxic masculinity. So according to you two, so to Abraham and Valeria, like, could you guys give your definitions of toxic masculinity?
Do you want me to say mine first, and then maybe we can compare and contrast with yours?
Yeah. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Awesome. So yeah, I think masculinity should be seen separately from like toxic masculinity.
I agree.
So masculinity, you have like a set of behaviors and practices, I guess, that traditionally have been like associated with men, right? In our culture, they can be both positive and negative things, but they're associated with men. But toxic masculinity is more of a looser term, I think, referring to a subset within those masculine set of behaviors that can be harmful or destructive, and can be linked to like themes like domination, humiliation, control, and they surround like emotional detachment or like this hyper competitiveness and aggression, maybe even intimidation and violence. And one really, really important one is like the objectification of women as like as possessions, or the sex, even further, like the sexual objectification. That's what toxic, I think all of these things that I've just mentioned lie in the subset of these behaviors, which is what makes it toxic.
Got it.
What about you, Valeria?
Yeah, I think you did a great job. But I think for me personally, I think the definition of toxic masculinity is a bit of a tricky thing to define, just because I also agree with separating masculinity and toxic masculinity. I think there's a big difference. But I think the reason why toxic masculinity is so tricky to exactly give a very straightforward definition would be kind of because toxic masculinity is a result of, I guess, what the more I don't want to say conservative, but I don't mean like conservative. Oh my God, I cannot speak.
You're fine. You're doing better than me. You're fine.
I don't mean conservative in terms of politically. I mean just
ideology.
Example, like, ideology. Yes, conservative ideology is what sort of creates toxic masculinity from what masculinity really is supposed to be. Toxic masculinity is kind of the byproduct of teaching men that they can't express their emotions, that they can't be feminine in any way. And I guess it also is a byproduct of us trying to define masculinity and femininity in two very like separate different camps, and like therefore enforcing what we know as the gender binary, right? So like by having these two really separate identities and just two different ideologies of what men and women are supposed to fall into, those two separate categories, I think that's what really leads us to have toxic masculinity be rampant essentially especially in Latinidad in Latin America.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
So it's funny that you mentioned the whole Latinidad, right? Because I myself came from a pretty conservative Latin like very very Mexican parents. Like my parents were very Mexican, and you know, my dad taught me about responsibility, about being tough. You know what I mean? He taught me about like to me that. So I really like that both of you agree that masculinity and toxic masculinity are like two separate things, right? I do agree, right? So in terms of toxic masculinity, in terms of like dominating your partner, in terms of abusing or being angry, right, or not showing emotions, I do agree that those things can be really toxic. The only one I would disagree with would be competitiveness, but not fully, right? Because I think the competitiveness depends on your occupation and depends on what you want to do with your life. And I'll get more into that a little bit later. In terms of like traditional masculinity, right? To me, traditional masculinity is like, again, we have gender roles, like you said, it was like a binary kind of thing. So to me, a man should be like chivalrous, he should be respectful, he should be ego. I actually think, I mean, emotional is fine, right? Like, I think a misconception is like when a man lets himself become vulnerable. That's actually one of like the toughest things a man can do, right? Because because being emotionless when you're going through a tough time, again, right now through COVID, if you were like in a hole and you just like try to hide it through this like plain face, or you don't show your emotions, then it's really hard to tell your loved ones that you need some help. And that's okay. Being vulnerable is one of the most, like, I guess, masculine things that you can do. So I do have to, I actually agree with a lot of the points that you guys have said. Again, the only one is competitiveness, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So now, I guess a question now. So you, Abraham said that you describe yourself as a feminist, right? So I have seen the feminist movement be divided into three different categories. The more classical one, the original, I guess, definition of feminism, in that I've seen or read, has been that, you know, equal pay, equal opportunity, equal well, not status, because that one's a little trickier to get into, but equal pay, equal opportunity, you know, equal chances, etc. And then there was the second one where it was like, where, you know, the second wave, or the more modern-ish feminism, that the definition that I saw was where women wanted men to be more vulnerable, which I'm actually okay with. Showing emotion or being emotionless, again, that's really counterproductive, especially if we get into like relationships. Like, being vulnerable is actually one of like the strongest thing you can do, because in order for a relationship to flourish, you have to be able to tell your partner what you want. And if you're not vulnerable and you're just stone cold, right, toxic, I guess, then you're really not going to get anywhere, and then that might lead to like divorce. And then you have the postmodern feminists, which is like the modern ones now, where again, this is why I'm here, but to my understanding, the most recent wave is like the whole like men like women need to like go above and beyond, women need to like, you know, supersede, and they have to, like, they're like forcing things, like they're starting to, in my opinion, I feel like they're like forcing situations into like, they want women to all be like going into like same fields, or be able to be competing with men at like every level, when I don't think that's like I don't think that's productive to a degree. So, but now I want to hear what kind of a feminist do you describe yourself as?
Yeah, well, I think feminism gets a bad rap sometimes, specifically with, like, actually, to tie in what we were talking about with toxic masculinity, that basically toxic masculinity was defined by a man who was inspired by sort of this dissection of what toxic femininity is, toxic feminism is, right? So I think now what I see typically, or when like people ask me like, why do you describe yourself as a feminist? You know, like, do you hate men? All of that? No, like, I don't hate men. My definition of feminism is just believing that we all are meant to be equal, and that we should be treated as such, like given the same opportunities. It just means being equal and paid the same amount of respect and heard the same amount of times as men, as well as everyone else. I think nowadays on college campuses, it's a little bit difficult in terms of, you also see this other side that I would like to describe as toxic feminism, which is sort of like what does give the feminist movement the bad rap of being called feminazis, for example, or being called like men haters, or, you know, just being like overtly aggressive for no reason, saying that men should be put down and women should be put up. I think the original version of the feminism movement was in fact just to gain equal footing, you know, and like in front of everyone, and just for everyone to sort of start believing that. But I think nowadays that it does often kind of mix between the two. And in terms does give the feminism movement a bad rap. So I would describe myself as a feminist that believes that women should just deserve equal opportunities as men and should be treated as such.
Awesome. And
If I could include,
go ahead.
George, you mentioned like how in the third wave, that they also want to have the same opportunities in the same fields.
No, same outcomes. Same outcomes. So they want so basically what the postmodern feminists, which are the ones that Valeria is talking about, the ones that give the real feminist a bad rap, and I've seen this, is the women that are like, they're like the page gap is really unfair. Why is it that? And they actually believe that, by the dollar, like men and women, if they have the same occupation that they work the same amount of hours, that they don't get paid equally. When studies have shown that that's not true, right? The actual like paid gap, the difference has a multivariable analysis based on the different gender biological roles and stuff like that. But
I don't know if I agree with that.
What do you mean biological gender?
Well, not biological, but for example, men tend to do harder jobs, and men tend to do more not harder, more dangerous jobs, and they tend to work more hours. And then on the women's side, women tend to, because they're typically like mothers and stuff like that. Again, on average, I'm not saying everyone, but on average, like when women go on maternity leave, I'm a teacher. My current job is a teacher, and there was 2 teachers that took 2 months off, right? So that's also factored into the equation in terms of that's also factored into the gender pay equation. What's it called? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to cut in before you, Abraham, but just to like amend what I mean by what kind of feminist I am, I also do believe that the gender pay gap is very real and should be addressed as such. Just because, I mean, Abraham, if you want to tie into what you're going to say before I keep going, did you want to say something?
Really like having to do with the pay. It was more like having to do with the fields. And I think women, due to like the society we live in, where labor isn't necessary anymore in most jobs, I think women are capable of doing the same exact jobs, I guess, except for maybe like super duper manual labor. You tend to see less women there. But for the most part, if it's not involving hard manual labor, I think women have, if not more capacity than men, to succeed in those jobs in the same fields.
So this is the part where it gets a little tricky, right? Because you say the same fields, right? So one of the things about fields, right, is the thing about fields is, oh my god, I lost my train of thought. Hold on. Oh my god. So you were
go into.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Valeria. I need to think.
Yeah. So I guess like.
George, I want you to listen. I want you to listen to what Valeria says.
I am.
Instead like, yeah.
I am.
Oftentimes when you try to find an answer, you don't listen. So yes.
I'm listening. No, I usually do.
All right, cool.
Yeah. So I guess going back into what you were talking about in terms of the gender pay gap. I mean, I disagree with like the studies that you're talking about, because like at the same time, while I agree men are biologically built not in order to, but are capable of gaining muscle mass much more quickly than women, that doesn't necessarily mean it should affect their pay, in the sense that, for example, if you were looking at let's look at a computer scientist, right? So regardless of whether it's a woman or a man or whatever gender they would like to identify with, I don't think that should affect their pay if it is, in fact, the exact same job, right? Same description, same work hours, everything. And I understand that women obviously have to take maternity leave if they do get pregnant and decide to have kids. But at the same time, why would that be justified in a different salary? Wait, let me finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just
go ahead.
In terms of, just because like I understand that obviously like they would have to take off more time than a man, because a man is not physically bringing life into this world. But it doesn't mean that they could still get paid the same, and then obviously the woman would have to take time off, but that doesn't mean that the pay should be decreased to factor in that they will have children, because at the same time you don't actually know if that woman will ever bear children or want to have children, so that's kind of taking away their choice in a sense.
And I guess when I mean about fields is because you mentioned computer science, and I'm very well adversed in the field because I was in college, and then I also I did some jobs, right? But if we look at a company like, let's say, Google. No, not Google. I think more Microsoft. Who was? Okay, hold on. Let me pull up the tab. Here it is. Yeah, it was Microsoft. So if you look at something like Microsoft, and you look at the actual position, like not overall, because staff is actually pretty evenly when you put in like the business aspect of the business. But if you're talking about just like computer engineers and computer scientists, it's about 80% male and 20% female, right? So it's not so much that they're getting paid less, right? But it's just in the STEM fields, there's just overwhelmingly a lot more men. And I'm glad that you're doing your nonprofit, right? Because you want to bring awareness, and you want to say, yeah, we really like it, and I really think that you might too, right? But overall, it just doesn't seem like women are that into the STEM fields. And again, there's might be something that I'm missing here, but overall, in the actual engineering STEM fields, there's more men than women in those jobs, and those tend to pay higher, right? So from my background as a mathematician, I went into the education field. I cannot tell you how many women I was surrounded by. I'm being serious, because women tend to have a bigger preference on the humanities, right? They like there's more teachers, there's more doctors, there's more lawyers. If you separate it by occupation, women are actually overwhelmingly successful in those fields, right? In the STEM field, if we're going to the STEM field, if you do find a case where a woman is actually getting paid to the hour less than a man, then that's a lawsuit waiting to happen, in my opinion. Again, the two teachers that went on maternity leave, it was paid maternity leave. It was like, I think it was 6 weeks paid maternity leave, and then after that, then they would have to start like taking money away. But in terms of actually getting paid less, then in the situations that I have seen so far, that's not the case.
Yeah, but what I mean is, in terms of going back to what you're saying, in terms of women maybe not being interested in STEM fields, well, obviously, like, it is true that there's an overwhelming amount of men in STEM fields, specifically, obviously, computer science, for example. I don't think that necessarily speaks to women's interest in computer science. It's more, there hasn't been a pipeline for women to go into computer science as there has been for men, in the sense of, one, not only if you were to look down, I'm sure I've seen statistics on this, but if you were to break down the men in computer science, for example, they predominantly come from already privileged backgrounds, right? So they're either going to be predominantly white, but there are also a lot of Asian men in computer science, right? But they all predominantly do come from privileged backgrounds in terms of socioeconomic status. And in terms of looking at why women aren't necessarily breaking into these fields as much, I think the numbers have been changing. There has been a lot more women going into computer science over the past few years because of the number of nonprofits that are looking to do the same work as the one that I'm doing, or the organizations that are out there. And now companies are starting to find the value in actually helping and bringing about more women into the workforce, right? Like, for example, I'm actually interning at Microsoft this summer, and
congratulations.
Part of like, thank you. And like, part of it, when I was actually speaking with recruiters and people who actually work there, they have now started to change their perspective on why it is important for women to be in the workforce, not only because of just saying we want a diverse workforce, right, but because it actually brings about economic profit for the company itself, right? And you're also bringing in people to the room that wouldn't otherwise have been there, right? So for example, like, this is kind of deviating from what we were talking about.
Knock yourself out.
But in terms of like the facial recognition software, right, that we've all seen the studies about how they predominantly couldn't recognize black faces and darker skin faces, right? And a big part about like the reason why that happened, and why, for example, Snapchat filters didn't work well on black faces, was because they didn't have black engineers in the room, right? And so there are obviously other examples like that have to do with women, but it's not only profitable for the company, it's smart for them, but it's important to give women opportunities to go into these workforces. I don't think it's about like general interest. I just don't think that, for example, like growing up, I'm sure, like growing up, all of my family, when I lived in Mexico, threw like dolls at me and doll houses and stuff, right? But my father always taught me, always gave me like logic puzzles, for example, and science kits and stuff like that. So if we were to teach young women from the very start that they can and are very capable of actually going into science, or at least exploring it, then I think that is what would be causing the shift for women to actually being able to see themselves in science. So Yeah.
Awesome. So I
You
have
said,
so I have some.
sorry.
Oh no. So I do have some points that I wanna address from what you said. But Abraham, yeah, I was gonna say Abraham, go ahead and go first because I think I'm gonna take a bit.
I like what Valeria said about, well, it's kind of like this mentality, right? You can't be what you can't see, and when you're born into maybe a family, right, like a Latino family,
Hmm.
that I guess kind of like when if I don't know, I'm speaking from a male perspective, but um, I think men and women are like in a nuclear family are kind of like you have different kinds of options that your parents give you or that are socially acceptable in the eyes of your parents. So, for example, maybe if a girl like 20 years ago was like, "Hey, I want to be a computer scientist," uh, I think it would be more like I think from experiences with my friends or stories that I've heard, um, that like parents would be more likely to say like, hey, that's you don't women aren't in these types of jobs, so I guess having to do with like you can't be what you can't see,
Yeah.
and when the
So.
society tells you, does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're
And
saying
then
basically like there's no role models. They don't see like the women like being interested in these fields. So then because of that they won't particularly take interest in it either.
so that was addressing your interest thing because I
Hmm.
think interest is like 50-50 on male. I think I don't know,
Hmm.
but anyways, the other thing I wanted to address is a very logical thing. A McKinsey study in 2019 uh, kind of did a compare and contrast with with companies that have women in their C-suite and companies that don't have women in their C-suite. The companies that have women in their C-suite are more profitable, and that's like a really big thing in my eyes. Like if having more women in your C-suite makes you as a corporation more profitable, why are you not?
If you don't mind me asking, what corporation are they studying?
It doesn't say which company. It says McKinsey. McKinsey just says on average, like companies that have women in their C-suite are more profitable.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I can send you that study.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, please do because I would like to see it.
I I will.
Not right now, but
Of
yes,
course,
I
of
would
course.
definitely like to see it. So Valeria, you mentioned two things that I want to ask you about your story there. So first one, like you mentioned, you came from a traditional like when you were in Mexico, they threw dolls down your throat, like you said, and then your dad gave you logic puzzles. Did you okay like so which one did you play with the dolls or were you more interested in the logic puzzles?
I mean, I think it was definitely a mix. I definitely liked both of them.
Mm-hmm.
My dad is. I've grown up around academia. My dad is a statistician. He also was an icon. He's basically. I just grew up around
Mm-hmm.
learning my entire life. So I think that was very valuable in terms of not only like the toys that I was given. I was obviously given dolls and all of the
Mm-hmm.
girly toys as well. Like I loved the Disney princesses growing up, but it didn't mean that I didn't like the logic puzzles or
Mm-hmm.
all of the different, more masculine toys that I was given to play with as well, you know?
Mm-hmm. So second question, when did you know that you really, really liked computer science? Like at what point in your life did you say, oh, I like this is fun and or this is awesome, right? I want to keep doing more of this.
Yeah, so ever since I was young, I guess I always liked tinkering with things. Like I like to take my toys apart and like rebuild them and to see how they worked. My parents always really encouraged that. I even did that with locks because I was interested in lock picking. um, but I guess like I didn't really find out much about computer science until my dad encouraged me to take a Python class in high school. I was lucky enough to have that offered at a high school of
Mm-hmm.
mine. And so I took that class. I really did not like it for about a week. And then I guess a week in, something changed, and I realized that it was actually super satisfying to see how I could quickly type something up and then see the results on a different screen, right?
Yeah.
So I could see like an instant result there. And I was also super into art, so it became sort of like a new creative medium for me to explore.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think high school was when I really started enjoying it.
That's awesome. So the second thing for me is like I like more than anything I consider myself a libertarian in the sense that you do what you want no matter what. Like I am actually I think that's awesome that you're bringing awareness to the STEM field. Like you want more girls to go into the STEM field. And I have seen a lot of like again I'm a huge gamer and I was in esports when I was in college as well. Huge nerd. I'm just gonna say I'm just a huge nerd, right? And there was a lot of gamer girls.
We all are.
Yeah, and there was a bunch of gamer girls there, right? And of course, because typically gaming is related with a lot of gaming oriented people are very in tune with like the computer sciences or the STEM fields, because that's usually how it was. I cannot tell you how many computer science majors I can count from the esports club that we were in, and they were definitely bringing awareness. But then you also mentioned that there was the white and the Asians that are like the most dominant in terms of those fields because of the I guess of the privilege, right? But I guess my question would be, what is stopping a minority right now from, let's say, they don't have to be in Princeton, or they don't have to be like in a really good state college, but most universities do offer computer science fields, right? But what's stopping like anyone from going into those jobs, right? And they're not easy. Like they're really not for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess short answer would be nothing, but long answer, not too long. I'll keep it short. But long answer would be sort of, while of course like there always, if like regardless of wherever university you go to, there probably will be a computer science class there, or at least some introductory classes there. I mean, you're paying tuition, or if it's for free, it's there. But it doesn't mean necessarily that, like, I guess like tapping back to what Abraham said, it's not like there's an AOC of politics, for example. There's like really no one in STEM that's not like a white man or an Asian man to look up to, who's made it big, has made companies that are producing, billions of dollars a year. So there really is no way to like see yourself in that position unless someone else sees you there first, and then I guess pushes you towards that. So like me, I would never have taken my computer science class, even though I was always interested, if it hadn't been for my dad encouraging me to take it, Mm-hmm. So I think it's more not about like the access. I mean, of course there's the access part, but it's also about having a support system around you that understands the importance of being exposed to STEM or computer science, and encouraging you to at least get exposure to it, and then seeing if you actually like it.
So two things about that. So first one, in terms of like women that are like dominating, and like I can name you one woman because she's actually a hero of mine, Dr. Lisa Su. She's the CEO of AMD. If you know AMD, they're one of the two biggest semiconductor companies in the world. And right now, and she has been kicking ass. There is no other way to describe it. She took over. She took over in 2014. She shifted the business model. The business model to turn it into like a console-oriented market, and then they used the money from they built the chips for the Xbox One and the PS4, and with that money, they actually spent 5 years in research and development, and then they created the Ryzen processors, which are just phenomenal. They have been killing it, and it was all because of her. And you might say, oh well, she's in a CEO position, which is a managerial position, but what did she start with? She actually was an electrical engineer from MIT, and she also got her master's, and it's Dr. Lisa, so she has a doctorate in what do you call it, in electrical engineering, and she used to work for IBM, and now she's with AMD, and she's one of my personal heroes because I love I'm gonna say it, I'm biased, I love AMD as a company, period. So even if she wasn't there, but what I've seen her do, like turn that company into a Forbes top 500. I think she's in the Nasdaq top 100. They just made it in, and they're one of the most profitable stocks. So, but again, one thing that I do have to mention, in order for her to get into that position, one, she doesn't have a family that I'm aware of. She works long hours, and she's like constantly pushing her engineers to like do more. You know what I mean? So from that sense, it's like, so from that sense, in terms of role models, I think if you look for them, you can't find them, because that one to me is like, she's like everywhere. If you look her up right now, you can just look at how amazing she's doing.
There's plenty of women who have. I mean, computer science was invented by a woman, actually. So there are plenty of women in computer science historically, but you don't really hear about them. I think it's kind of like, the movie Hidden Figures, where they exist, but you don't really talk about them. I mean, when you think about STEM and big tech, you think Bill Gates,
Silicon Valley,
Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah, you think Silicon Valley, So it's like, of course there are, if you do look for them, there are those hidden gems, and there are plenty of women in computer science, but it's more like, it's a privilege in itself to even know to look for them, or that they exist, just because like I didn't know about this one, for example, and it's not that I know everyone, obviously, like I don't. But I think it's also just, I think it says something about the fact that women haven't gotten as much
exposure,
like exposure, and haven't really become a household name when it
Gotcha.
comes to STEM.
Got you. So you talk about so again, what you're doing is awesome. I see, if you want to advocate for it, go for it. That's awesome. Do you think that if we had a culture change, right, where we, like, let's say in the school system, right, because I'm a teacher, but my usual mantra is not so much like to push girls to do STEM. I kind of just tell them to do what they want to do, right? Of course, I tell them to be smart about it, right? I tell them to be smart about it, like don't because there are some degrees that I don't like because I'm a STEM guy, right? I definitely I do tend to push them a little bit towards the STEM fields. But to me, it's like live and let live, right? So do you think that if they changed, I guess, education in a way where they are pushing for women to do more STEM fields, do you think that the numbers like would rise, or do you think that would like have a bit of a cultural change in terms of the way, in terms of what is like established right now?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a big part of it is the fact that it is cultural to not really push for some reason. It has become kind of the norm that women go into humanities fields, which are also this like they're all great, you know, and they all have their own, you know, interesting side of it. But I think the reason why women haven't really been pushed into STEM as much is because of this sort of pipeline that offers support in terms of whether they have a family that recognizes the importance of learning how to code, or at least being exposed to it for a certain amount of time. And also just having the tools in order to really understand what that means for a future career and what they can actually do with it. So like, for example, to revise my earlier statement, when I said I actually really enjoyed computer science, I think I actually really learned that there could be a future for me in computer science when I went to this camp called Code with Klossy, which is a camp that was started by this supermodel called Corley Kloss. And after going there, she essentially has like what my organization does, but summer camps. And they've grown an insane amount since I went there when I was in high school. But it's essentially just all for girls, right? It's an all female coding environment. And as a result, we were able to meet different executives from companies and other computer scientists that were women who are actually like going out there and doing it, you know? And I think that was kind of the moment when I said I could see myself going into it, right? So I think it is about not only just knowing that it exists, but like knowing that you are in fact capable and should at least try it, you know?
That's cool. Abraham, anything you might want to add in? Because I feel like Valeria and I have been going back and forth for a bit.
I don't know. We started with toxic masculinity, so I had all my points ready for that. And
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Women in the workplace.
We can go back.
Yeah.
It's so interesting hear you guys talking about it. It's just I have less to say about this topic than I do about the other one, you know?
Yeah. So then let's go back to toxic masculinity. So is there any questions you might want to pose about it? Because again, you said you had a bunch of points. Then go for it. By all means, the floor is yours.
So I just think that there should be a clear distinction made between, like, we already established there's a difference between masculinity and toxic masculinity. I think toxic masculinity is more having to do with the culture around masculinity. What I mean by that is, like, for example, I'm not saying that men have inherent or biological traits that are toxic. And like, that's not true. It's just that the culture surrounding, like Valeria said, the culture surrounding men, what men should be, what men can and cannot do, it does cause toxicity. For example, and I guess I'll ask a question right now, but I just want to share my take and my perspective on what I think on how we should redefine masculinity.
Go ahead.
But for example, when I was in elementary school, I was in private school, and I usually had a bunch of girlfriends, like friends that are girls, not girlfriends. and I loved hanging out with them. And then so they always played with these things called Littlest Pet Shop. It was like these little figurines, right?
Yes.
And because I loved hanging out with them, I was
Very
like, hey
cool.
mom, let's go to. I was like, yeah, I love playing with the girls. So that sounds strange. So I went when I went to the store and I was like, oh mom, I want these, or dad, I want these. They never questioned like why I wanted like girl toys. But when I went to school and the guys were like, and the guys would see me with my Littlest Pet Shops, they were like, yo, what are you doing? Yeah, and nobody would tell me shit because nobody would step up to me, right? But like they would like behind my back, they would make fun of me, like, oh, or they would stop playing with me. That's like a, you know, that's a thing ingrained in the culture, right? That I can't play with these toys because I am a boy. I should be playing with my toy cars and I should be doing sports, which I did, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there should be a cultural redefinition of masculinity. You know, one that like strays away from, maybe we can talk about this, like maybe I can ask a question, what like machismo is. What do you guys think machismo is? But like straying away from machismo and taking, because you know men love challenges, taking our love for challenges into our hearts and in our feelings, right? Like, are we brave enough to be vulnerable? Are we strong enough to be sensitive and cry? I remember when I was little, or like when I was in junior high, I took pride in not crying. I remember this one time I told my brother, yo, Eddie, I haven't cried in a year. And he was like, okay. But I thought I was so cool. I was like, yeah, nothing fucks with me, nothing hurts me. That's so wrong. I don't know who or what taught me to think that probably my dad or probably the culture around me, right? That like it's not okay to cry. I don't know. And like being in football, I single-handedly experienced like locker room talk, you know, where it's like really disgusting talk about women's bodies or what's your body count, whatever. That really screws with a young man or a male mind. To see like so yeah, maybe I could push the question forward. Like, how do you guys define machismo?
So
because I want to talk about this in our culture.
So I have so I want to break it down into two different not scenarios, but like, okay, so the machismo within at least the Mexican community that I hang around with, to them machismo is like, we live in a machista society because, let's say, like, for example, sports. Most sports that anyone watches is like men, right? And then most of the, except for like maybe tennis, most of the like dangerous jobs, or like, again, like you were saying, that you have to be really tough, that women, that like men shouldn't cry, right? Okay, but to be fair though, my dad actually encouraged crying because, you know, it's not good to bottle up your emotions because that actually hurts. I did that for a bit and it sucks. I did that for a bit. But then also, like, oh my god, I lost my train of thought again. Valeria, go. Valeria, go. I lost my train of thought again. Jesus.
Okay,
defining machismo, I guess.
Okay, I'm gonna say one thing, and you're gonna hate me right before I define what machismo is.
Got
But
it.
to go back to the part where you said like you don't believe in like telling like your female students, for example, like to go into computer science. It's like it's not that like I think we need to be telling women to go into computer science because it's like not the only field that they're underrepresented or haven't been exposed to, but it's more like just presenting it as an option that they are equally capable of going into.
Oh, well, of course. Like... I do that. Sorry, Abraham, that I'll address that one real quick. I'll address this real quick before we go.
Chill.
Yeah, so no, of course, like, again, like I tell you, there are fields that I think are way more beneficial in college than others, right? So what I tell students is, like, if you're gonna go into a field, right, make it something, be smart about it. Like, go into business, go into entrepreneurship, go into STEM, right? Like, I give them like what I think are their best chances of success. So I do mention it, right? But it's not that I'm pushing it on girls. I'm just pushing it on my classes in general, right? Of course, if they push back and they tell me they want to do something else, well, then I did what I thought was correct, right? And then, of course, again, live and let live. If they want to do something else, even though I might think it's a bad idea, it's a free country. They do whatever they want. But no, just to address that point, it's not that that I just tell them do what you want. No, I do, like, to me, being successful, like, you're going into public relations, you have a nonprofit, and you have a minor in computer science, which to me it sounds like you want to start some kind of business. It's kind of business, and you do want to involve computer science in it in a way. Well, again, I'm making an assumption, but that's just like from what I've gotten from you. It seems like you're making smart decisions. That's what I want my students to do.
Yeah. I just wanted to like put forward that
No, that's fine. Trust me. Look, there is nothing you can say to offend me. This is a discussion, right? So if we disagree on something, trust me, I am not gonna like hate you or anything for it. I'm a very reasonable human being.
Abraham.
You are. Just
Yes,
even having
I
this
agree.
conversation is
Yeah,
very
no,
reasonable.
I agree. But thank you for answering that point. But going to machismo, well, machismo is such a loaded topic. I feel like, because like my entire family is still in Mexico. I'm the first generation American of my entire Mexican family.
Good for you.
As well as my sister. Thank you. So to me, it has like growing up between the United States and Mexico has very much been sort of coming to understanding with how to deal with machismo in a sense and how to navigate that in a way that you can still have civil conversations with your family members, right? Because all of my cousins, with the exception of 2 baby girls, are men. They're all guys. And they're all around my age or a little bit older. So growing up with them, specifically one set, but I'm not going to mention it. We're very much raised in sort of, again, like what we like to talk about, how machismo is like, you're supposed to be a manly man, you're supposed to be strong, and like you're supposed to be chivalrous towards women, but you're also still able to women are still kind of like seen as property in a sense and objectified, right? So like while there is this aspect of being machista in terms of there is this weird aspect of being chivalrous towards women, but at the same time it's like contrasted by the fact that women are heavily objectified in a society that is machista, which is pretty much a decent amount of Latin America and Mexico. Pero I guess like machismo to me is I guess I've already defined it, but it's also just like toxic masculinity. It's a byproduct of what we think masculinity should be.
Now, so this is where I'm going to take the conversation to a little bit of a tougher territory. So you mentioned your cousins, right? So are your male cousins what you described? Are they do you think they're machistas, or do you think they're more like responsible masculine, I guess?
I think a few of them are machistas, and I have called them out to their face about it, actually. But yeah.
A bit of a strange question, but if you can't answer it, that's fine. But how do you know what your uncles, how they are or how they raised them? I guess if you go ahead.
Yeah, I have 3 uncles. So my mom was raised with all men, actually. We have 3 uncles, and they each have 3 sons, with the exception of one of them that has the daughters. But one of them, for example, I mean, they're all great. I love all of them. But I think one set of cousins that I'm not as close with was very much raised in a way that was, I don't want to say they were taught. I mean, I would say like you are a byproduct of your environment, but it's not that they don't, I guess, believe that women are meant to be respected, but the practices don't show that, you know, like their actions don't show that in the way that they speak. So I would say that they were very much raised in a way that was like men are, you know, supposed to be like the caretakers, and they're supposed to be, you know, providers and all of that. So I don't think they were raised necessarily to be sexist or anything, but they were just raised in a way that they were just taught that in order to be a man, you have to be strong, you have to be providing for your family, you can do whatever you want type thing. They're very spoiled. But yeah.
All right, so then here's the second thing. So you mentioned, both of you mentioned that, you know, women are objectified, which it does happen a lot, and it's bad. I actually don't like that that's a thing, right? But let's also, like, if you guys are current with current like news or current like culture, the climate of the culture is promiscuous sex, And to me, that like women being objectified, and it goes both ways. It goes both ways. Like women, you know, the women that are just like that are like looking for one night stands, or that are like on Tinder, that are looking. And again, I'm not saying that you don't have that, not to do that. If you want to, again, you do what you want, right? But to me, stuff like that, like promiscuity and like, again, and like saying, oh, how many women have you slept with, and vice versa. To me, that's a byproduct of that. So, do you think that if we shifted the culture into a more of a respectful, where is like get into a relationship, be more responsible, be more chivalrous, because you mentioned that they were raised in a way that they should be chivalrous to women. And again, coming from a traditional Mexican household, I was also taught those values. I was taught to never lay a hand on a woman, and I've never had, and I never will. I was taught to be respectful. I was taught, and my dad actually encouraged, you know, to cry, like to be vulnerable, right? And I actually think that's a trait that should be taught, because being vulnerable is actually not a weak thing. There's no, like, being Superman in a sense is not really healthy in a relationship, in my opinion, especially if you're going through some tough times. So I guess my question is, because Abraham, one of the topics that we had first, you mentioned that if women want to make the choice of like sleeping with a bunch of men, well, I think that a byproduct of that is going to be that men are going to be like, well, if a lot of women are doing that, then men are still not going to see them as they're not going to be respectful to them. Maybe unless they find a partner, right? But if they're so used to, like, you know, banging a bunch of chicks, then maybe the relationship that they go into is probably going to be toxic as a byproduct of that. So I guess my question is, do you think shifting the values back to, you know, be more responsible, like don't be slipping around, and you know, bring it back to you know, if you're going to go on a date, be respectful, you know, take her out to dinner, etc. Like kind of like more conservative. Again, this is the conservative in me trying to fix that problem. Trying to fix that problem in a way that does bring those like values back to traditional masculinity, or respectful masculinity.
I hear your question. Yeah, and I'm trying to think about what I think about it. Look, I think I don't know if reverting back. I don't know if you can revert back to a culture where you have, like, you're super respectful and maybe a little less promiscuous. But I think because, like I said, toxic masculinity is about the culture of masculinity. I think it also engenders a side where women feel like they also need to like live into, like, fulfill that self-fulfilling prophecy thing, like play into a stereotype. For example, like the closest thing I can think about, like, think Christian Grey, right? 50 Shades of Grey. This guy's a millionaire. He is super successful, and he has an amazing body, whatever. He has all the sex, like super good sex, whatever. I feel like our culture idolizes for men to be like him. Because I mean, I personally felt like, I was like, damn, I want to be like that. You know, he's super rich, he has a great body, and he has like all the sex he wants. Because I don't know, I've noticed that a lot of the
and that's what I mean, right? Like that, and I agree with you, right? You can't watch a Pitbull video, literally a Pitbull music video, without having like 20 women, you know, belly dancing with like almost no clothes on, right?
Exactly. So it's because that's what the culture, that's what the people have been taught to like.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's what the culture is, right? That people necessarily like that. I don't know that everyone likes Pitbull, right? I don't know about that.
Fair.
But I don't know that. But
a lot of people.
Yeah. But again, because that's the mainstream, right? That's what people see. That's generally what people think that they want. I've actually had students. That say, "Oh, I want to sleep around and I want to be, you know, I like to have sex with a bunch of dudes," right? Well, then, if that's really what you want and what you like, again, Valeria, I'm not saying that you're like that or you're not, or you're not like that, but if you are like that, then how are you like if you're feeding into that culture, then how are you expecting men not to objectify them, right?
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, that was it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of things, but in terms of like going back to how we were discussing that by women sleeping around a lot, that's kind of like why shouldn't they be why should they be upset when they're objectified? I think, well, I disagree with that, first of all. But the reason why I think that is the reason why women are objectified more than men, and of course men are objectified, but it doesn't actively harm them.
The culture doesn't reinforce it, which is kind of what Abraham was talking about.
Yeah, it doesn't actively harm them, which is why I don't think it's an issue. But that's also why, why should it be up to women to, police the way that they act and, the way that they make decisions because of the way that men react to it, you know? We should be, rather than teaching women to not sleep around, because I personally believe that you can sleep around with whoever you want, however many times. You can be in an open relationship, you can be in a monogamous relationship. I don't really care. But I think it's more about, not looking at what others should be doing, but what we should be doing to sort of change that. And in order to do that, we would need to be teaching. This is also going back into toxic masculinity, right? So we need to be actively teaching our young men growing up that even though women might be sleeping around with people, that doesn't mean that they necessarily want to be objectified, right? That just means they're exploring their sexuality in the way that they want to explore it. It doesn't mean they're inviting people to sexually assault them, you know? It doesn't mean that that's what they want.
Hold on. Assault. Careful. Assault? Assault?
No. I mean, I think.
Well, fine. Catcalling.
Well,
I wouldn't consider that assault.
Two things. No. Well, catcalling is harmful. I think that is part of toxic masculinity, but I do genuinely mean I think this idea that women sleeping around is giving men the idea that they want to be objectified and stuff does lead into rape culture. I genuinely do believe this, and there has been plenty of people who have actually examined how this society that we live in today that objectifies women because of the sexual partners that they have had and the amount that they have had and the clothes that they wear. It doesn't mean that they're inviting people to objectify them. It just means that they're living their lives the way they want to live it, you know? So I don't think we should be trying to switch back to the olden ways of what was right in terms of just monogamous heterosexual relationships. I think it's more about teaching our children. I mean, I personally am a big believer that everything, in order to actually make societal change, we need to be teaching the young ones, you know, what we want to see eventually change. Of course, it's not super immediate, but I think it's super important. But I think the key isn't into reverting to the old ways. It's more about teaching young men and women that, and the rest of us, we also need to keep educating ourselves about the fact that just because people are sleeping around, including men, it doesn't mean that they're sluts, you know, slut shaming shouldn't be a thing, you know?
Yeah, I hear you, but see, here's the part that I'm conflicted with, right? Because again, unfortunately, that is the culture that we live in, right? And I'm not saying that you can't do something about it. I hear you. Teach boys and girls that, you know, if a woman decides to have those decisions, then that if a woman decides to have those decisions, then you shouldn't just assume that all women are sluts, right? Or you should, or you should be calling anyone a slut, period. But those values, again, they come from the house, right? So they come from what you're going to teach your kids. But I guess now let me ask you this. You say that you have to educate your kids to not judge and do anything like that. But are you gonna, if you have a daughter, right? Would you tell her once she hits legal age, I don't know, 16 to 18? Because I don't know. This is just me, but I do not know a father that would tell her daughter, hey, yeah, go ahead and sleep with whoever you want. I don't know. That's just me. If you have different experiences, that's why we're having this. But I personally would feel awful if I told my own daughter to do that, right? So would you? So I guess to go back to your point, would you teach your own daughter that? Oh yeah, if you want to go around and sleep around and do stuff like that, because again, if we do push for that culture where we're teaching men that women are gonna be taught that it's okay to do stuff like that. But that's just the culture, right? It's not. That's just the culture that you're pushing for, right? So would you do it?
Yeah. I'd love to answer that.
Yeah, go ahead, Ibrahim.
Sorry. I thought about this a lot because I'm looking forward to becoming a parent one day.
Same.
And look, the way I was raised, it might be limited because I don't know, my dad didn't give me the talk super early on, or I had to learn more about the stuff like about sex and shit from like outside sources or the media maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But as a father, I look forward to expressing to my kids that there are healthy ways to explore your sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way you phrase it, like, oh, once you turn 16, you can tell them to sleep around. That's not, no.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody in the world wants that. But I think there's a healthy way in which I, as a father, can encourage a healthy and safe way to sexually explore your body. Is what I'm gonna do, and that's my opinion. As far as how to do that, I don't know, but I'm gonna have a conversation with my wife. Maybe we can find middle ground, or I don't know. I don't think there's, you're just stuck with the option of when they turn a certain age, you can have all the sex you want.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think any parent any day is like going to say that to their kid, but it's more like, I don't mean like, obviously like that is my personal belief that I think anyone can sleep with whoever they want. I don't think people should be judged by body count, right? Because like, why should women be judged for body count when men aren't, for example? But like, in terms of, to answer your question, would I tell my kid when they're of legal age they should just go around and like screw whoever they want?
That was
like,
bad. I actually like the way Abraham had explained it better. Like, oh, it's like explore your sexuality, and if you like do end up like having sex just to do it, I mean that makes sense, right? But you're still kind of giving them a pass to sleep around, right? That's sort of how I see it. That's how I see it.
I mean, I personally don't think it'd be like giving them a pass to sleep around. I mean, of course, like no parent is gonna want to know when their kid. I mean, some parents do want to know when their kid starts being sexually active because, you know, being safe, birth control, all of that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that by teaching your child that, I think the important part about telling them that it doesn't matter, like body count essentially, I mean, you have to be healthy and you have to be safe, you know? But body count shouldn't define the way that someone's treated. You know, I think that's sort of like the message rather than go sleep around with people, you know?
Body count does define. For example, if like locker room talk, yo, what's your body count, dog? Like, oh yeah, dude, if it's high, it's like, oh, you're cool, you're a badass. If you're a virgin, it's like, oh, that's cool, dude. But like, it's there, like.
And unfortunately, that's the. I mean, again, you go to any rap video, literally, and that's what they're glorifying. They're glorifying like banging a bunch of chicks. They're glorifying, you know, all these guys like sleeping around and, you know, not being really responsible because all they care about is money, drugs, and whatever it is they're talking about. Women's ass, apparently, because that's I cannot tell you how many songs I've heard on like pop songs where like there's a woman's ass somewhere in the lyrics, right? And I personally think that's like, again, the tunes are kind of cool. You know, again, I don't judge people for the music that they listen to. I like a lot of varieties of music, but I do think that it's like, man, I can definitely see people just kind of like taking this blowing this out of proportion because of what they're saying. So I guess striking a balance would actually be really hard because again, this is me, and this is where we differ. And if any of the Princeton people are like listening in, I am actually looking for a woman that is a virgin, like when I get married. But because again, I don't like the idea of I personally don't like the like a woman being like, you know, sleeping around and being very promiscuous, right? But that's me, right? But that's why people have choices, right? Like if you're okay with marrying someone like that, that's awesome. Like I mean, if that's okay with you. But to me, I again, if the love of my life doesn't happen to be a virgin, right? Like that can happen. Well then, I mean, shit. When it's cuando te toca, you've heard that term before, right? I'm not gonna be like an asshole about it. I'm not if I definitely like the girl, right? But I personally would like my wife to be a virgin when the time comes.
But
so I guess sorry, go.
Yeah, I mean, just before you. Okay, I'm not gonna ask this intrusive question. But I mean, like, I understand because I think that is a big part about. I mean, like, I think that's great. Like, if someone wants to wait for marriage to have sex for the first time, like, I'm not gonna judge them. Obviously, like, I think live your life the way you want to live it. But I do think, sort of like, I'm not like I respect what you're saying, but I also think that can often lead into what we were talking about, toxic masculinity.
How so?
In the sense of if like we want our women to like remain pure, for example, and untouched by the time that they become our wives, like why aren't men also doing the same? I mean, I know some men are obviously saving themselves for marriage, but like
I mean, I am, and I'm admitting it. I'm admitting to it.
No, and I think that's great, but I think that itself is not toxic. But I think there is like sometimes it does sort of turn into this toxic thing where it's like, if we can't like if we, for example, didn't want to wait for marriage ourselves, like if I was a man and I wasn't waiting for marriage and I was sleeping around but I expected my wife to be, I think that's a double standard. You know, like in your case that's not a double standard, but like I think that is a little bit sometimes what feeds into toxic masculinity when it comes to the idea of virginity, right?
Yep.
So yeah, what were you gonna say, Abraham?
I guess the question I want to pose is like, how do we prevent or reduce the level of toxic masculinity to our kids, to the incoming generation?
That one's easy for me. So this is the biggest issue that I see in America in general. So okay, before we like keep the conversation going, to anyone listening, I am a nationalist in the sense that I care about the U.S. and the U.S. alone. Okay, it's not that I don't care about other countries, but this is my home. You know what I mean? So when I say that I want change to happen, I'm generally speaking about the United States. Okay, so just before I go into these, I'm gonna start bringing some numbers and stats. Abraham knows how I like to roll, but what's it called? Yeah, I'm talking about the culture change that I think needs to happen in the United States. Is a lot of that, whether it's, again, if you want to teach your kids to be, you know, not to be, you know, sluts or you know, men with body counts, right? If you want to teach your kids to be safe, like I feel like that's a really good message. If you want to practice sex, just do it in a safe way, right? Do it in a safe way, and make sure that if you do end up doing it, just make sure that you're not judging anyone else, or if you decide not to do it and other people are doing, just don't judge them unless it becomes dangerous, right? That would be like my only caveat, because I'm all about compromise. But the biggest issue that I see right now in culture is, again, I was raised with two loving parents. My dad taught me, again, how to be chivalrous. He taught me to be respectful. He taught me like all these things on how to treat women, right? And I've followed it to a T for the most part. I'm not perfect, but the biggest, a huge issue that is happening in the United States currently is the absence of fathers. The single motherhood rate in the United States has gone up from 5% to almost like 45% from 1969 to present day. So that's 1 in 2, and I've lived this in schools. I see kids that tell me that they've never met their dad, or that he doesn't care. You know what I mean? So to me, it's easy. We need to reinstate responsibility in relationships, not so much into fathers, right? But if we can lead people to be like, okay, if someone gets pregnant, right? If you get someone pregnant, or if you love someone and you decide to marry them, then you have to like reinforce the belief that, you know, you're with them no matter what, right? Unless it becomes dangerous, right? Because it is more likely for a kid to succeed, and a lot of the values that kids get are from their parents, like more than school, more than anything. Again, Valeria, you mentioned that your dad is the one that pushed you to become a computer scientist, and he gave you like the logic puzzles, and I feel like that's a huge mold of like the way that your parents molded you is like a huge part of who you are, right? So so that one's pretty easy. So that one's pretty easy to me. A lot of the problems is that because of the absence of fathers, right? You look to you watch Pitbull's videos, you watch someone like, I don't know, old Kanye, or you watch Lil Wayne, or I know I'm in the more of the pop rap issue, but that's where you see it most, right? People tend to look for role models when they don't have one, right? And then they tend to get the wrong idea of what it's actually like to be a man, or what it's like to be masculine, right?
Yeah,
and usually a lot of those messages are, you have to be tough, you have to never cry, you never have to show emotions, right? Because I was never taught any of that, right? And if you talk to anyone that had loving parents, I mean, again, a lot of my friends are definitely on the conservative side, so their parents were a lot more, you know, strict on them. But because of that, they do have those values where it's like, yeah, you have to respect women, and again, to me, I don't slut shame, because again, as always, if you like sleeping around, that's fine. I do for me, if you do sleep around a whole bunch, then that actually might factor into like the whole, if I do want to commit into a relationship with you, just because like I'm uncomfortable with it. But that's me. So that's my answer to that one.
Yeah.
Stronger accountability as a man in case you in case you leave your kid.
Yeah, just more accountability, and it's been proven in every metric that a kid, boy or girl, that is born with both their parents has a higher chance of success in almost every metric. So, and
Sure,
that's in in school, that's in crime, that's in success, in love and empathy, every single metric that you can think of. If you grow up with two loving parents that are teaching you whatever it is they're teaching you, you have a higher rate of success than if you didn't.
That's fair.
Yeah,
and
no,
I
I agree
respect
with that. It's a support system, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the media does have a lot to do with it, George. You mentioned like rappers, but I think it goes above and beyond that. Like whenever I was watching cartoons when I was little, like tough men would always be like muscular. Popeye, you have your Johnny Bravo. I don't know. It's like this idea of a man, has been ingrained, or like superheroes. They're always like these big muscular men who have like superpowers, that show no vulnerability, no emotions. So yeah, the media, aside from the music industry, does play a part into maybe this toxic masculinity.
And it's funny you mentioned the superhero movies, but actually a study was made in, I believe it was Cambridge. I can't remember if it was Cambridge or Oxford, but there was a study done on why a lot of young men, because it's usually young men that go see usually young men go watch the superhero movies, right? And a lot of young men that idolize, like, for example, like that idolize the Thors or the Captain Americas of the world. A lot of them idolize them a lot because they don't have a role model, right? Like a lot of kids like are looking for that because again the numbers are outstandingly big, right? And yeah, and the media plays it like that. But if you did have a role model, right? Because you might not get along with your dad, but generally speaking, if you discipline your kid well enough when they're little, then they will listen to you, right? And then the values that you teach them when they're young, if they're the right ones, then they can go watch like these movies, right? But they're not gonna say like, oh, like that's not what a man is like, right? Because again, what my father taught me trumps what movies and stuff like that say, right? So it's the core values of what make you as a person that will trump the rest of the outside things, right? Like because you can't call it like sensationalism in terms of toxic masculinity with the superhero movies, but it makes money, and I thoroughly enjoy them, right? But I can't see people mistaking those as being, oh yeah, I have to be like Thor, right? Where he's a literal god, right? He's a literal god, and he has he's like immune to anything.
What you said is fair. Cool.
Yeah, cool. I agree with that. I love Marvel movies.
Me too.
I love them too. Black Widow is getting moved back, and I'm pissed about that.
I know.
It's getting moved back. I'm actually really upset.
It's about time she got her own movie.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm excited about it because my dad and I are really into the Mission Impossible types, and I feel like her movie's gonna be kind of like that because she's not she's not a Thor kind of a super heroine, but she's badass.
She's a little darker.
Yeah, for sure. Do you read off topic? But have you read like her comics by any chance?
No, I haven't read her comics.
Man, she really has a pretty dark past. Really dark past.
I've read like briefly because I've been curious about like what her background is since we barely know anything about her from just like the Avenger movies. But yeah, didn't they like sterilize her?
Yeah, they did because in order for
to be a spy.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Jedi thought process, but this one was a little bit more extreme. It was like you have to have no attachments. You have to have like in order to be the perfect assassin, pretty much you have to be like pretty much emotionless. And if you have a baby or you have like a chance at love, then that could like mess with that.
Derail.
Yep.
Is that why she doesn't like Steve Rogers?
No. She was actually pretty brainwashed, but Hawkeye got her out of it because she used to work for Hydra actually.
Oh, got it.
They like outsourced her to Hydra, and she was pretty much brainwashed into thinking one way and one way only. And Hawkeye had a shot at killing her when they were fighting, but she was like knocked out, and she took her, and then she kind of rehabilitated her in Shield. That's like her. That's like her backstory.
That's cool.
Huge nerd.
I've had fun. Yeah, this is a good conversation. I have fun.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. So that's awesome. Yeah. So then, in terms of fixing toxic masculinity, my answer would be we need to be more as parents. We need to be more responsible with our kids and pay more attention to them because I can attest, as a and I'm pretty sure you can too. Well, I don't know. I can't speak for you, both of you, but my parents gave me a lot of freedoms when I was little, and I actually think that was a little bit. I think that was a little more harmful than it was useful, because when you give someone too much freedom, right? Even if you do have the like both parents, if you give them too much freedom and you don't teach your kid right from wrong, from what you believe is right from wrong, right? Because the parents are the ones that are supposed to be doing that. Then you can still have like someone that idolizes something that should not be idolized, right? I don't look at Pitbull and think I need to just start banging 20 chicks at a time every time I go into a nightclub and his music comes up. But I know that a lot. But I know that, like you said, like the locker room talk. That's what a lot of kids grow up like thinking, that is like, yeah, like if I want to be cool amongst my peers, that's what has to happen.
Yeah.
So
that's fair. I agree. Yeah. I think I also grew up with a bunch of freedom to the point where like maybe affected my personal discipline. But I mean, I fixed it now. Hopefully. But yeah, no. In order to, I think, fix toxic masculinity is first just like recognizing that, you know, it's not something inherently within men, but it's something within the culture that causes men to buy into this, you know, like fear of appearing feminine or being perceived as feminine. Anyhow, I had fun talking about this. What do you think, Valeria?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I also agree. I think it is part of fixing toxic masculinity is just sort of reflecting on how we even got there, in terms of like, why do we think these are the ideals of what a man should be defined as, you know? And sort of like reflecting on that and how that may affect others and lead into even violence against women. I think that's something super important to reflect on. I don't think it's something that can be fixed super easily, obviously, but in terms of like trying to fix it, I think the main aspect of it would just be to educate yourself and sort of reflect on the way that you interact with the world. And
so the two things, so the two biggest things I think that are making, not that are making men like this, but are also making men like modern men a little bit, I'm gonna say incompetent, because there's a lot of guys that are fairly incompetent. And I actually showed Abraham the general census survey was showing that from 1989 to, contrary to popular belief, from 1989 to 2020, young men from the ages 18 to 29 were having less sex than before. Like, there's more virgins today than there were like years ago, right? Even though the culture usually shows you that apparently like men are supposed to be like banging a ton of women. And I thought, why is that the case, right? So I dug into it a little bit. Two things. One, modern feminists. We already established that the feminists are giving the real feminists a bad rap, are the ones that are like trying to get women to, you know, win at all costs. Like, I guess toxic masculinity. They're trying to get women to buy into like the toxic masculinity, right? In my opinion. And the modern and the
femininity.
Well, no, because I think it's actually, I mean, if it's what we define about toxic masculinity, then I would think that the modern feminists are trying to get them to be like that, because the modern thought process is that women don't really need men, and also that men need to be more, and also that men have to be like less, you know, aggressive in a way. But what that does is positive traits of men are like, you know, to be strong, to be vulnerable, to be respectful, and also to be competitive. I actually think being competitive is okay. And competitiveness could be really good if you're trying to be like, okay, if you want to be like a CEO kind of person, then you have to be a lot less agreeable. And that's what the modern feminists are trying to get women to do, right? They're trying to like, trying to get them to be like that.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's more like, I think toxic femininity is more about not certain, because feminism is supposed to be about the gaining equality for all sexes, right? I think toxic feminism is more about sort of like arguing that women should be higher up than men. I don't think it's about like, I don't think like feminism, like the feminism that it's supposed to be doesn't mean that, isn't saying that like we need men. And I think toxic femininity is like is kind of shining, is kind of blocking what femininity is really meant to be. It's not about like saying like, oh, we don't need men, obviously. It's just like equality. And I think just to like clarify.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you again, because if we're talking about the real word of a feminist, then I don't have a doubt in my mind that everyone should be a feminist. You know what I mean? Like everyone should be striving for equality of opportunity, equality of pay, equality of all of that, right? But yeah, unfortunately, modern men are being taught that toxic masculinity is like a very bad thing, right? But you don't explain it to them, right? To like if you don't explain it properly and you tell them that being masculine is toxic, then you're gonna create wimps, right? And I don't know any woman that wants a wimp, right, as a partner, like unless
That's
you,
toxic.
yeah. Well, I mean, no, I mean that's the truth. That's the truth. I can't think of a woman that wants an incompetent partner, right? Like
But it
realistically.
doesn't necessarily mean like I think that does feed into toxic masculinity too, because I don't think it's safe to say, because like what really, I think by saying like what woman like wants a wimp, you know, like I think that does kind of feed into toxic masculinity. Because I don't think it should be about like what a woman wants. I think it's just like men should be raised to be respectful. They should be raised to like that they can be whoever they want to be, you know.
But what if
Even a
they're
whip.
but what if they're like pushovers to the point where they'll pretty much be like slaves to their partners?
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone should be a pushover, but I think it's sort of like the messaging about not like why men shouldn't be pushovers is what feeds into toxic masculinity. It's more about like.
Then I guess I should have explained myself, because that's actually where I was getting at, right? When I say wimp, I don't mean like physically scrawny or, you know, if you don't play sports or anything of like the sort. I'm just saying, like when I say that you can, because in my eyes, again, I'm more of the traditional guy. In my eyes, what I look for in a partner is someone that will make me grow as a person. Yeah, aside from like, you know, starting a family or whatever. In a more traditional sense, like my partner is gonna be someone that's gonna elevate me, right? And vice versa. Like I'm gonna compensate for her flaws and she's gonna compensate for my flaws, right? That's how I see it, right? So if you're gonna have a partner, right, like you don't want someone that's just gonna like say yes to everything you do, or isn't gonna really gonna like, again, challenge you to, you know, become a better person, if that makes sense.
Fair. That's different. That's different than like what woman wants a wimp.
I guess I should have explained. I guess I should have explained myself a little bit better in that sense.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that.
Of course. Any last words? Because that's pretty much all I got. This was really good.
I think we had a healthy discussion.
This was really good, and this is shorter than most because we got straight to the point, got to it. I don't have really anything else to say. We all agree that toxic masculinity is bad, but the main reason for toxic masculinity is because the culture reinforces it, and also because it's not being taught at the house level, like where it's supposed to be taught. Whatever you choose, again, we might disagree on how we want to raise our kids, but of course, but reinforcing values to your kids is better than having no values at all, unless those values are straight up bad. I will say that. Unless the values are straight bad, and just be responsible. Just be ready. I guess the next thing is just be ready to have kids. When you're gonna have kids, you just better be ready for it.
Thanks, George.
Just be ready. No, I'm just being serious. If you're gonna have a kid, just be responsible about it, because I am not a fan of these people that are just like, oh, dipping again, because the single motherhood rate is so high. It's just be responsible about if you're gonna be promiscuous, then just know that regardless of how many contraceptives you have, how many condoms you use, there's still a chance that something might happen. Okay, so just be extra careful with stuff like that.
Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you again for including me.
Yeah, of course, and thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
Two Princeton alumni. I feel special now. Not gonna lie.
Alumni, not yet.
Not yet.
You guys are gonna do fine. I don't have a doubt in my mind.
Hopefully one day.
Yeah. By the way,
I'll catch y'all later.
By the way,
What's
Abe, your friend here, awesome. You're awesome, Valeria.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're cool. You're really, really cool. I really like. You're really like. Oh man, you're really cool. That's all I'm gonna say.
Aw,
You're
thank
a computer scientist. You're already, like, you can't say anything to make me dislike you.
Aw. Thank you so much.
No problem. Have a great.
It was great talking with you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.